TechGig webinars, our endeavor to empower techies. We believe that sharing of knowledge is the key of enhancing our performances and for our growth as professionals. With this principle in mind, TechGig has initiated a series of webinars conducted by industry experts to give a crisp insight of various domains. Topic for today's session is Hibernate, getting started with CRUD. We are delighted to have Mr. Zahir Nanji, Senior Technical Architect, Vertex Software Private Limited, with us today. Zahir is an engineering graduate with 11 years of experience in architecture, design, and development of end-tier applications, mostly in the Java J2EE technology stack. He has experience in working with services as well as product development organizations and specializes in enterprise application integration in the banking domain. Gentlemen, this presentation will continue for next 45 minutes and we will take your questions after the presentation. In the meanwhile, you can post your queries through the chat pane available in the webinar software. Without further ado, I introduce you to our guest speaker, Mr. Zahir.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So, the organizers, am I audible?
Yeah, you are audible. Please share your screen.
Yeah, so is my screen visible now?
Please go ahead. Thank you.
Hello? Hi, yeah, is the screen visible now?
Yeah, it is visible and we can hear you also. Please.
Okay, great.
Thanks.
Let's get started then. Yeah, so good afternoon, everyone, and as the title suggests, we're going to speak about Hibernate today. Hibernate, I'm sure most of you have heard of Hibernate. Even for those who haven't, Hibernate is a persistence framework. It's an open source persistence framework, and it's developed for both the Java community as well as the .NET community. Now, I having most of the experience in Java J2EE, I'll be using the Java based Hibernate framework for this session, but the concepts still remain the same for those who would like to use in Hibernate, which is the Hibernate version for .NET. And since this is getting started kind of a session, it's going to cover the very basics of Hibernate, and I don't intend on getting into complexities of Hibernate and advanced topics, which if given an opportunity and the time, we'll sure take some advanced topics also going ahead. But the basic objective of today's session is to give beginners an insight into how to start off with Hibernate, what it is, how it's used, where it's used, how it is helpful to reduce lines of code, etc. So it's targeted at the audience who is new to frameworks such as persistence frameworks or OR mapping frameworks. So we will keep this entire session at that level so that beginners benefit from it the most. So that was just setting the expectations for the session. So now we can go ahead and start off. Okay, before getting right into Hibernate or taking a deep dive in, what I would like to first set as an expectation is that whether or not to use a framework like Hibernate, a persistence framework or an OR mapping framework like Hibernate. That's not so the point of this session is not to debate whether it's advantageous to use something like Hibernate or not. There are different schools of thought, and there are different communities who have different views in using frameworks like Hibernate, and the way to use it, whether or not to use it, etc. So this session's objective is not to promote any particular school of thought, but it's just to give developers try to get developers started with Hibernate when they want to use it. So that's setting one more expectation for this session. So now I think see, what is Hibernate, why use Hibernate, and how to use Hibernate are the three most important points which we're going to look at. But before we start with that, it's very important to know where Hibernate fits in to your in your application, whether it's a web-based application or it could be a standalone application. Hibernate basically fits into the data access layer primarily. So if you have a typical 3-tiered or an n-tiered, n-layered application where you generally have a presentation layer, with all the GUI stuff, your JavaScript libraries, your MVC frameworks, etc. You would have a service layer which would have your business logic, validations, etc. And you would have a data access layer where where you put in code which access your data. Now that data could be in a database, it could be through a web service, it could be through a message-oriented middleware. It doesn't matter. The data access layer is basically responsible for fetching and storing data in the format which is required by your application. So I guess Robin here has asked a question. I will be taking questions online also, because there will be certainly questions which are specific or contextual to the slide which I am showing. So parking it to till the end of the session would maybe remove the context. So I think Robinson has just asked a question whether Hibernate is a framework or a object-oriented modeling tool. Where Hibernate is a full-fledged persistence framework, and when we go through the session, it'll get clear as to why it is a persistence framework and not only an object-oriented modeling tool. So with that, again, coming back to the data access layer. So I've already specified what the data access layer is supposed to do within your application. Let's see how a data access layer would have looked or looks when you haven't started using a persistence framework or a framework like Hibernate. So you're using, for example, if you nowadays without using such frameworks, you normally just use plain JDBC code to access data and save data into your data store. At a very basic level, of course, the data access layer is responsible for executing database queries. That's what's the first thing which comes into your mind when you talk about the data access layer. Though it's not only database queries which the data access layer does. Depending on your application's requirement, the data access layer could not only execute database queries, but also maybe get data from a web service call, get data from a message-oriented middleware, anywhere. So in the context of this session and in the context of Hibernate, in the context of persistence frameworks, we will assume that the data access layer which we are going to use is primarily responsible for executing database queries. Yeah, Anup, your question as a layman, why do we need Hibernate, will get answered in subsequent slides, definitely. Yeah? And so let's look at a typical code snippet. Suppose you're using plain JDBC to say access data or insert data into say you have a client table in your database and you want to insert a row into the client table. Okay. Now I keep reiterating that this is a getting started kind of a session, so even the examples which we'll be taking will be very, very basic, and the objective is not to make you experts on Hibernate, but the objective is to make you understand the concept of Hibernate, so that you you get a kickstart and you can start experimenting on your own. So that's going to be the primary goal of this session. So if you look at a typical JDBC code, which is inserting data into a client table, what I've done is I've taken a client table with a client name, client address, and age. Of course, there would be a primary key also in that table. So we'll assume that there is a and I've used MySQL as a database server, which provides you the feature of having auto increment, primary keys. So the client, the table which I have selected has a auto increment primary key. That's the reason the insert statement which you see here does not contain the primary key field. So what we're doing is we're just inserting the name, address, and age, and letting MySQL take care of generating the primary key. Yeah, there's a question, what's the advantage of Hibernate over EJB? Actually, that's a separate discussion altogether, because now, if you see nowadays, the Java persistence API is generally the the specification used even on the EJB layer, or rather in the data access layer. And whether to use EJB or Hibernate that's not the question. The question is you can actually use Hibernate in your EJBs too. So it's a separate kind of a discussion, which I think it would get into a lot of complications at this moment of time. So Anup, maybe offline, or you can just contact me over email or something. You can have this answer. So we'll look at this code, which you can see right now. It's a very basic insert. If you write a data access layer, what you normally do is your data access layer will take care of the database operations, and obviously the inputs to the data access layer would be in the form of Java objects. Like, for example, when you have a client table which takes in name, address, and age, generally in your object model, what you would do is create a class called client with attributes called name, age, and address, and use that as a data transfer object or a DTO to pass data between layers, like from the data access to the service, from the service to the UI, etc. So we won't get into those patterns, but yeah. So if you look at this insert method over here, it takes in a client DTO, yeah, and these are the basic steps you follow to use plain JDBC to insert into a table. You write the insert statement, you create a prepared statement, get a connection, create a prepared statement, bind the values which you need to insert from the DTO onto the prepared statement using the set methods, and execute the prepared statement and commit the database. That's what you have to do in a very basic insert statement. Now, taking this ahead, if you take a code snippet of plain JDBC where you're fetching data from a database, you do something like this. You would have a method in your data access layer called, say, fetch all clients, for example. Now this method would execute a select statement. So it would first get a connection, prepare a statement. I've not taken any where conditions here. If you had where conditions, then you would need to do a bit of binding of data to the where conditions also. Once you execute the query, you get a result set, and you would then iterate through the result set because you're going to have multiple records. While iterating through the result set, what you would be expected to do is populate the data from the result set into your client DTOs, so that they may be returned as a list to the layer which is requesting for them. So this is what you would typically do in a fetch method in a data access layer. Okay. Now these two examples which we took were very, very basic. Inserting you were just inserting into one table, just 3 or 4 columns in that table. Even while fetching, we're just fetching from a single table. But in a practical application, it wouldn't be that simple. You would have complexities where you had to insert a master-child relationship. So where you have a client table and you have client details table, for example, or an order and on order items table. So when these requirements go to the next level, the amount of code or the amount of JDBC code you have to keep writing, and in fact, rather the amount of repetitive code you have to keep writing goes on increasing. Right. So that is obviously one of the pain areas. The other thing is say you have 3 or 4 tables, you're going to have lots of queries. And say, suppose if you take a very basic scenario where you're developing a product in an agile methodology where you keep adding functionalities to a product, you're always going to have this situation where you need to keep adding columns to your database tables, modifying columns, etc. Now, whenever you make changes to a database, a database table or add a column, etc. When you're using plain JDBC, there are lots of places where you have to go and make changes. In the SQL queries, you have to go add attributes to your Java class. You have to all the setters and the prepared statement population. Everywhere you have to go and make changes, even if you're going to add a single column into a database table. So there are a few pain areas right now when you try and use JDBC. Obviously, there would be people who would maybe say that, but still JDBC remains, it's near to the heart of the developers. They know how to write it. You have full control over what's happening. Of course, as I already said, there are different schools of thought, and the idea is not to promote any one of them. But yeah, these are a few pain areas which I could identify. Is Hibernate completely database related? Is one of the questions. Completely database related, you can say so. Hibernate right now is a persistence framework which is able to dynamically generate SQL statements. So as of now, it is database related. If you look at the core Hibernate core, there are other Hibernate projects such as Hibernate Validator, Hibernate Shards, etc., which can be used for other non-functional requirements like multi-tenancy, etc., and validations. But the core Hibernate features which we're going to talk about today, yes, it is completely database related. Is Hibernate used in Microsoft Enterprise blocks or data access block? I didn't quite get the question. I mean, I could understand it, but from whatever I understand, Hibernate is a .NET version of the Hibernate framework, and it is a contender, or it is one of the frameworks that you could use as part of the data access layer in a .NET application. Other than Hibernate, there are frameworks like Ibatis, which is also an OR mapping and a persistence framework. Differences between Hibernate and Ibatis I wouldn't go into right now. It would, we would be digressing from the topic itself. But yes, Ibatis is one of the strong contenders for a persistence framework. So quickly going through these pain areas which we see here. Writing insert, update, delete, and select queries for each of the entries in the application. So if you have a huge application where you have say 50 tables and you have master-child relationships between those tables and everything, there's going to be a huge amount of code which you're going to write. You will write lots of insert statements, update statements, delete statements, select statements, etc. All of these statements have to be managed. When you write JDBC code, you have to take care that of opening statements, closing the statements you open, closing connections, closing result sets. If you don't do all of those, there are lots of resource leaks which might happen. And another cumbersome activity, maybe the most cumbersome activity while using plain JDBC, is that you have to write code to populate your POJOs with data from the result set and vice versa. So when you saw those code snippets, there was a lot of setter methods being called, getter methods being called, etc. So mapping the attributes of Java Beans to JDBC statements, mapping the fields of a result set to Java Beans, these are all very cumbersome activities which you have to do when you're writing plain JDBC code. Of course, most of the organizations have homegrown persistence frameworks also, which now any homegrown persistence framework would actually be a subset, or you can say conceptually equivalent to something like Hibernate. So what we are saying is we're not comparing homegrown persistence frameworks with Hibernate, but we are comparing the concept of writing plain JDBC code against using a persistence framework like Hibernate. Then when you had multiple records, you had to iterate over results as to create a list of Java Beans that could be used. So these are all the pain areas which a developer has to go through in order to make a plain JDBC code work. Okay. Now, so very late in the session, we now come to what is Hibernate. So Hibernate started as an object relational mapping framework. So by object relational mapping framework, it means initially Hibernate was a framework which allowed you to, you can say, map data between your relational databases and your object model. That's why object relational. The object stands for your, your Java object model, and the relational would be your relational database tables. So it started off with a mapping framework where you could just configure which columns of which table map to which attributes of which class in your object model, and you wouldn't have to write any mapping code and all those setter methods and all those things which you saw. So it started with that. As I said, that is the most cumbersome activity in a plain JDBC or a data access layer. It tried to solve that cumbersome activity, but over a period of time, just before we go to that, from our early code samples, this was what we had seen when we talked about mapping. Right, so fetching data from a result set and setting it on your POJO, or vice versa, getting data from your POJO and setting it onto a prepared statement. So this cumbersome activity was made easier by Hibernate as an OR mapping framework. Gradually, gradually Hibernate has become a full-fledged Java persistence framework. So it's not only an OR mapping framework now, but it does provide other features such as connection pooling, transaction management, validations, caching, concurrency, multi-tenancy, and a lot of other functional and non-functional requirements related to persistence. OR mapping was just one part of it, but now Hibernate is a full-fledged persistence framework. And this being a getting started session, again, I'm not going to get into how Hibernate provides the advanced features like concurrency, multi-tenancy, and caching, etc. This point just shows that it is something more than just a object relational mapping framework. Anu, I'll park this question for the end of the session because it's not in the context of the current slide. How will this Hibernate change with in-memory computing coming in? Will it have any effect? So I'm sure you're meaning you're pointing to the cloud environment and cloud computing as such. So we'll park this question for the end of the session. Okay. Now lots of questions coming in. Request you guys to post questions which are contextual. So if there's something which you have not understood for a given slide, or you've not understood in the current context of the session, I'll be happy to answer them while giving the session. But general questions like like which company wrote the Hibernate framework, is Hibernate slower than pure JDBC, etc. So general questions, I think we can park them or request you to ask them towards the end of the session. Yeah. Okay. So now that we know what Hibernate is from a definition point of view, it's a persistence framework. Let's see why. Let's take scenarios to see why you would need to use Hibernate. Actually, I don't know if a poll is possible online, but it would have been interesting to know how many people are very new to persistence frameworks and how many people attending here are already using a framework like Hibernate, but I'm not sure if that such a poll is possible online. Okay. So obviously, I think I've already answered the question as to why use Hibernate. We had gone through a certain number of pain areas which developers face in writing plain JDBC code, and we also went through a list of features which Hibernate provides as a framework. Now, if you take those 2 points into consideration, it automatically answers the question as to why use Hibernate. Okay, obviously to reduce your pain areas, and also to and it also provides you certain non-functional requirements or implementations of non-functional requirements that you would otherwise have to code for. But yeah, I found while I was creating this presentation, I found a blog which listed out 10 reasons for using an ORM framework. We'll quickly go through those points to see what the blogger has in his mind. And while going through these points, the most important point to be kept in mind is that whenever we are talking about the reasons for using an ORM framework, you should always keep in mind that it's the main reason is the configuration based implementation. So all frameworks, persistence frameworks, OR mapping frameworks, they give you configuration files. So without writing a lot of code, they provide you the non-functional requirements or functional requirement implementation that you would otherwise end up coding in your application, and that would remove your focus from the business logic to coding all the non-functional requirements, which is the most painful area. So just one point to be kept in mind, that yeah, all the 10 reasons which we'll see soon, the reasons they become reasons for using Hibernate because they are all configurable. Okay, they are not just conceptual, but you can actually configure all of those requirements in frameworks like Hibernate. And how to do that in Hibernate we'll obviously cover in the subsequent slides. I'll just give a moment till this reflects on your screens. Is Hibernate, yeah, someone asked a question, is Hibernate slower than pure JDBC while generating lots of SQL statements in runtime? Well, if you go from a pure measurement point of view, I believe frameworks would introduce some amount of performance hit, obviously, due to the generic nature. However, the way Hibernate has evolved and the caching mechanisms which it's using, very large enterprise applications are using Hibernate as a data access framework, and even mission critical, time critical applications are using Hibernate. So if you go by case studies, there has not been a very you can say huge amount of complaints from a performance point of view. But when you look at web applications, my view is that when you look at web applications, the network latency is already to some level, and when you compare the performance, the difference in performance numbers in plain JDBC against Hibernate, even if Hibernate was a bit slower than plain JDBC, it would be negligible from an overall HTTP request processing time point of view. That's my view. I mean, of course, other people might have other views on this. Okay, so these are the 10 points which you see on your screen. I've just it's an excerpt from one of the blogs which I came through. The first and foremost reason it states for using an OR mapping tool is that you can follow the domain model pattern. Okay, now a domain model pattern is it's basically a way of designing your application. You can say up to quite recently, the general way of developing or designing an application has been to design the database first. Check your business requirements. Depending on your business requirements, identify the database tables, the relationships, etc., and then go to the object model based on your database. But now, because the data itself is now undergoing lots of change, when you go to the cloud computing fundamentals, and you go to very huge terabyte of data processing, where you look at social networking sites which have huge amount of data, Facebook, Twitter, all the social networking sites. They have had to move away from relational databases, and they have now you can say they have flat file databases stored in JSON formats. So the format of storing data has now changed quite a lot, And because of that, people are now moving towards a domain model driven design rather than a database driven design. So you first design your object model to suit your business requirements and not worry about what database you're going to use and how you're going to structure the database and stuff. So when you want to abstract certain things, either you want to abstract your object model or you want to design your object model separately and a data model separately, you need an OR mapping tool to be able to map, because if your database is being designed separately, you might not have a one-to-one mapping of each database column with each attribute in your object model. So when you have these kinds of design constraints or you're following this kind of a model or a pattern, you would then go for OR mapping tools would help you synchronize between your database or logical business model and physical storage model. So that was quoted as one of the primary reasons. Another reason would be a huge reduction in code, which we will now see in the subsequent slides. Why Hibernate, while using an OR mapping tool, you're writing your number of lines of code reduce. Changes to the object model are made in one place. Once you update your object definition, the ORM will automatically use the updated structure. I was speaking about this earlier, where I said when you have to change your design, say you want to add a new attribute to an entity. If you're using OR mapping tools where most of the things are driven by configuration, there's minimal code change which you'll have to do when you're doing stuff like adding columns to your database tables, etc. Rich query capability. ORM tools or ORM frameworks or persistence frameworks are also responsible for dynamically generating SQL statements, which we'll see in our subsequent slides. The advantage is that you don't have to worry about which database you're using. As long as your object model fits your business requirements and you configure your persistence framework in a manner which is appropriate to you, the framework would auto-generate queries depending on which database you ask it to. So you may have MySQL, you might have SQL Server, you might have Oracle. The persistent framework is built or are built such that they know about how to generate database specific queries or queries which would be optimized depending on the target database. So those are one of the reasons or one of the functionalities which these frameworks provide. The rest of the I think points here are, of course, they are valid points, but not in the context of this session they would be too advanced to discuss right now. So I'll leave it at that. And so if you can see the data loads are configurable. It talks about parent-child relationships getting handled without too much code. Concurrency support, cache management, transaction management, etc. So we'll leave these to some advanced topics of Hibernate when we get to that. But yeah, so this was one of the blogs which I found interesting, and hence just displayed an excerpt of that. So this is a code walkthrough series. So till we don't get into the code, I think it's going to give some anxiety to a lot of people. So how is the part which talks about what do we write, what do we configure, what do we code? Okay, so that's what we're getting into right now. Before getting into code, but however, since as I said, the objective of this session is to get the concepts clear. A pictorial representation on how Hibernate works would be something like this, where you have a relational database, you have tables in your database. What you generally do is also create corresponding Java objects. So if you have a client table, you create a class, client class, and have attributes which correspond to your database table columns. Hibernate sits in between your relational database and your Java objects, providing the mapping features, providing database connectivity, concurrency, and all those features which we spoke about. And how does Hibernate do this? Obviously, it does it with the help of configuration files which you provide to Hibernate. Right, so this would be a pictorial representation, a very, very high level view of how Hibernate works. And now we'll get into details of each of these parts now. Okay. So let's take a very simple example. let's say this is our table definition, and we have a client table which has a client ID, which is an auto increment. No relationships, just a single entity with client ID as a primary key. And since I'm using MySQL, MySQL allows me to define an auto increment column. So whenever I insert a row, it automatically assigns a value to the client ID. Okay. I hope I'm audible because I'm getting a warning here.
No, you are audible.
Any of the organizers, can you respond? Am I audible?
Yeah, please, you are audible.
Okay, yeah, because I suddenly got a warning here saying you might be experiencing network connection. Okay, that's fine. Okay, so we have a table, we have a Java class called client, and we have corresponding attributes which correspond to the columns in the database: client ID, name, age, and date of birth. So now to get Hibernate working, what information would we need to provide to Hibernate so that it's able to execute? Supposedly what we've heard about Hibernate is it magically generates. We don't have to write any SQL queries. So if you think, if Hibernate needs to generate SQL, what do you think you need to provide to Hibernate? Obviously, the first thing you need to tell Hibernate is something about your database. At least which database you're using, what's the IP address on which your database server is running, the port, the username, password, the details which Hibernate would require to at least connect to your database. Will be the first thing you'll need to tell Hibernate. Next, you would have to tell Hibernate about the tables and the columns which are there in the table, and information on which column in the table maps to which attributes of the Java object which you've created. Right. So by providing try and connect to the database, figure out what queries to execute, and also have population of POJOs from database and a population of all the information is going to need. So the configuration files of Hibernate is the configuration file which is required for the database connectivity, which is general XML.
Sorry for interrupting. There seems to be
configuration file.
Hello.
Like this.
There seems to be some problems in voice. It's breaking.
So I have taken these which are required for closing a couple of hello. Yeah. Okay. Is the screen visible? Or? Okay. And or I don't know how many slides I need to, should I just go through this slide again?
Yeah, that would help.
So what we were talking about is, yeah, Keshav, I'm okay now.
No, it's still breaking.
Yeah. Is my voice clear now? No issues now? Hello? Shall I disconnect and reconnect just again? I can join back, right? If I just connect my, I'll just disconnect and reconnect back. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. Hi, just to check, am I audible now?
Yeah, you are audible now. It's better. Please go ahead.
Okay, great. Yeah, yeah, sorry for the short interruption. Okay, so we were on the slide where we were looking at how Hibernate works when you provide the certain configuration files to Hibernate. So there are two types of configuration files which Hibernate requires. One of them is the file which provides information about your database, and the other are a set of files which would provide information about the mappings between your table columns and your Java classes. So what you can see on your screen now is the Hibernate configuration file. This is the file where you specify your JDBC driver class, which obviously needs to be part of your class path. Your database password, your database connection URL, username. Dialect basically means what database you're using. So I'm using MySQL for the example. So the dialect is MySQL. The dialect basically tells Hibernate to use a particular, that you're using a particular database. So what it can do is it can optimize the queries which are generated to suit that database. There is a property called hibernate.showSQL. This is mostly for debug purposes, where when you set this to true, Hibernate logs all the SQL statements which it's executing. So you can have a look at the SQLs which are getting generated. This is mostly for debug purposes, and if you'd like to tune any queries as such. The last property called current session context class. Now this is one property which needs some explanation. Right now I'll just give a very short description. This is basically, this tells Hibernate as to which level you want to cache your Hibernate session. Okay, we'll come to this. You might not understand it at this moment of time, but we'll come back to this when we are doing our code walkthrough. Okay, so I'll come back to this property. After that, you have an entry called mapping. So like I said, there are two types of configuration files: Hibernate configuration, which talks about the database properties, and the others which talk about mappings. So since I have only one entity in the example called client, I've created one mapping file, and all the list of, so Hibernate allows you to have different mapping files per entity so that you can logically break down your configuration files. So if I have one entity, I have one mapping file with me right now, and generally it's named as the name of the entity .hbm for Hibernate mapping.xml. So this is about the hibernate.cfg.xml file, and then the next snippet which is coming up on your screen is the mapping file. So let's go through what the mapping file tells Hibernate. If you see, the crux here is you're specifying a class name, a fully qualified class name. That is the name of your POJO, or the class which you created, which holds attributes corresponding to your database tables. Here you have mentioned which table this particular class corresponds to. So here we have table equal to client, and catalog is the name of your schema in the database. Okay, there's a question here from Shubham. If the application is small and say only 2 pages with CRUD operations, then whether you should go for Hibernate or you should go for plain JDBC. Okay, if you're very conversant with Hibernate and you have your hands dirty in Hibernate, you will find that it is very, very fast to put up a 2-page CRUD application if you use Hibernate. Because you don't have to write any SQL statements, and CRUD, when we come to the code snippets, you will see that CRUD operations are just 1-line codes in Hibernate. So I think if you're writing small applications, in terms of speed of development, I think you should be able to use Hibernate and speeden up your coding time. And so I'm sure that once you come to the slides where I'm showing you snippets of code, it'll automatically get clear as to whether you can use Hibernate or it's beneficial to use Hibernate for smaller applications or not. But yeah, if you want to get a application out very fast and you don't know Hibernate and you're just starting with Hibernate, then it might not be worth the learning curve, because it's just a 2-page application with CRUD, and you can just write some database.jdbc queries and get over with it. Okay, so back to the mapping file. We've specified what we're telling Hibernate here, that okay, I have a class called client, and this class corresponds to my client table. Now within the class, I list out all the attributes. What I'm trying to do here is map the attributes of my Java class to the columns of my database table. So here I've specified, so there is a special property called ID, which tells Hibernate that this is the primary key of the table. Okay, so I've said, okay, my primary key is the column called client ID, and it's of an integer type. And there is a class called there is a tag called generator. Now, when you talk about primary keys, okay, there are lots of different logic or different ways in which you can generate primary keys. Like I already showed in our case, MySQL allows you to have an auto increment column. In fact, Microsoft SQL Server also allows you to have an auto increment column. Oracle doesn't have an auto increment column. So you might want to leave it to the database to generate your primary key. You might want to have your own algorithm to generate the primary key, or you might want to use standard algorithms like high-low generators, etc. So Hibernate gives you a full flexibility of using your any sort of ID generator which you like. You can plug in your own ID generator if you like. In this example, what we've done is we've used the database auto increment column. So what we're telling Hibernate here is that this identity is a keyword provided by Hibernate. When you say generator class is identity, we're telling Hibernate that you can just leave the creation of the primary key to the database. So in statements like inserts, Hibernate would not generate a primary key. It would leave it to the database to generate the primary key. So that's what we're telling Hibernate here. Yes, how can we define if primary key is a composite key is a question which has been asked. Like within the ID tags, the XSD of the mapping file, if you go through the entire XSD of the mapping file, here if you see we have only one column defined within the ID tags. You can actually have multiple columns which you can define. You can actually define a separate key class, like you have a client POJO. You can have a client key POJO which contains attributes which would form your composite primary key. So Hibernate supports composite primary keys also, though I have not taken them as examples in this session because didn't want the session to get too heavy and didn't want to digress from just simple concepts of Hibernate. But yes, composite keys are supported by Hibernate, just to answer your question. Difference between dialect and driver, well, they're two different things altogether. Driver is the class which you would like to use, so Hibernate actually doesn't come with drivers installed. So when you say dialect, you might say the dialect is MySQL, but that doesn't mean that Hibernate ships with the MySQL JDBC drivers also. That is something which you have to externally specify. So that's the reason there are two different properties altogether. Is Hibernate thread safe? We will come to that, Robinson, when we reach the part on session management. So this is a very basic. We talked about the ID column in the mapping file, and similarly we have properties called name which map to the column called name, which is of type string. We have age corresponding to age of type integer. So here this is a file where you map all your database table columns with your Java bean attributes. Okay, so now that we know at a conceptual level what information we need to provide to Hibernate, now let's see what code we need to write to invoke Hibernate as a framework and allow Hibernate to use these configuration files which we have created and see how it generates SQL queries on its own. Now, at a very basic level, any database operation which you would like Hibernate to perform, there are a few basic steps which you have to go through. Okay, like you would have done while writing a plain JDBC code. What you would first need is a connection to the database. So that's similarly what Hibernate needs to. Hibernate provides something called a session factory. Okay, and a session factory it's basically it's a thread safe session factory which Hibernate provides, and ideally it should be cached within your application because creation of a session factory in itself is the most expensive part where it reads all the configuration files and loads them in memory. So you wouldn't want to keep creating session factories whenever you want to perform a database operation. You would want the session factory to be cached within the application, either as a static member of some class, or if you're using Spring, then define it as a singleton and inject it wherever you need. So session factory would ideally be a singleton, associated with some singleton pattern somewhere. Catalog, yeah, someone asked what's the use of catalog. Catalog is the name of your schema. So in MySQL you can have in one database server you can configure multiple databases or database schemas. So that's the name of your schema. For 10 tables, do I need 10 mappings? Well, if you're going to use all those tables and you have corresponding Java objects, you would need to create 10 mapping files. But we'll come to that. There are ways around that also. We'll come to that towards the end of the session. How are foreign keys defined? I have not kept that as part of scope of this session, unfortunately, where we talk about master and child relationships. But whenever we come to that, foreign keys are basically defined as one-to-many and many-to-one relationships in the mapping files themselves. So you can specify that this particular property has is linked to this primary key of this so and so table. So there are provisions within the mapping file to be able to specify foreign key relationships. Okay, so you've created a session factory and you've cached it somewhere in your application. From the session factory, what you get are obviously sessions. So you can, sessions would be analogous to maybe your database connections. Okay, if you say so. What you would generally have is if you are not using Hibernate, you would have a connection factory or a connection pool, and from a connection pool you would get a database connection and start executing statements on the database connections. Similarly, from a Hibernate session factory, you get a Hibernate session. So a Hibernate session, you can you can say that it's analogous to a database connection. Now there are certain there is an API which Hibernate provides called sessionFactory.getCurrentSession. Okay. Now this is where we come to that property which we had left out in the Hibernate config XML, which was called the session context class. Now let's take an example. Say you have a data access layer which needs to insert rows into 2 tables as part of a single transaction. Okay, so you have a screen maybe where you're entering multiple rows, and you need those rows to be inserted into 2 different tables and within a single transaction. What you would generally have to do in a data access layer is that take a connection, execute the first statement, and execute the second statement using the same connection. Only then you'd be able to have those 2 statements in a single transaction. Now the problem there is that you have to keep passing the connection object around there, right? So that you're sure that for this particular transaction the same connection object is used. Now Hibernate has provided a utility method called getCurrentSession. What Hibernate does is it will make sure that it gives you the session which is, if there is an active session already available in the defined context, it will return that session always. If there is no active session, it will give you a new session. Now, the most important thing here is what is the meaning of the word context. Okay. Let's take a web application, for example. When you talk about a web application, you generally create a session or a database, or you take a database connection from a pool for every request. So whenever a new HTTP request comes into your application, you generally take a connection from the pool, execute whatever statements you'd like to, and then return the connection back to the pool after committing your data. So similarly, what you would generally do in a web application is that for every HTTP request you would generally use one session. So say somebody posts an order form, you would create an order Java bean, populate it with whatever data is coming from the screen, and give that to the data access layer to insert into the order table. And if it's supposed to insert into order as well as order item table, then you would make sure that it's part of a single transaction. So in such cases, instead of having to keep passing the connection object around or trying to define the connection object at the request level or stuff like that, what Hibernate provides you is a API which will make sure that it gives you an active session if it is already available. Now in the example which I just quoted, the context in our case is the request, the HTTP request. So because we wanted to have a single session for a HTTP request. Okay. So depending on what you've configured in the Hibernate configuration file, the session factory will return you an appropriate session. So if you've configured what we had configured, or which is generally be used in a web application, we have configured the class to be thread. So if you recall, the value of the session context class property was thread. Now when you say thread, it means that whenever you do a session factory.getCurrentSession, Hibernate will first check whether there is an active session available on that thread. So in a web application, every HTTP request is a new thread. So it will first check. It basically creates your session objects as thread local variables internally when you define it as thread. So if there is already an active session on that HTTP request thread, it will give you a reference to that same session. If there is no session available, only then it will create a new session. Right? So these were a bit of internals of Hibernate, but yeah, this is a standard step which you generally perform. This is how you get a session session using session factory.current get current session. What you have to do next, once you have a session, you begin a transaction. Now it's you have to know that even though you want to execute a select statement, Hibernate requires all statements to be executed within a transaction boundary. So before executing any statement, it could be a save, it could be an update, it could be a select, anything. You need to begin a transaction, and at the end you need to commit rollback a transaction. After beginning a transaction, you perform the required database operation, insert, update, delete, select, whatever, by invoking the relevant Hibernate APIs, which we'll obviously have a look at. So these are the basic steps you will have to follow to execute any database operation using the Hibernate framework. Just to summarize, using the session factory, get a session. Using the session, start a transaction, and then perform the required database operation. Okay, so now this is the place when we start actually getting into code snippets of examples of inserts, updates, deletes, selects. So till now, so at a conceptual level, if you have any questions, maybe we can spend a couple of minutes and answer a couple of questions if you have any. Because this was understanding concepts was the crucial part of the session, and now we'll just have a look at a few code snippets. Yeah, current session class property. There are other values like JTA, Java Transaction API, and there is also another which I don't recollect, but I think yeah, Java Transaction API is another one of them. But there is a third one which I'm not recollecting at this moment of time. Okay, recommendation as to whether you should use annotations in code or use configuration files. It's again two different schools of thought, and that's a separate debate altogether, because it's not only in the context of Hibernate, but in context of any framework which you're using. Nowadays, all frameworks provide after JDK 1.5, everyone provides you options of configuration files as well as annotations. So I mean, that's a separate debate altogether. It won't be within the context of this current session. So if I want to give a quick answer, maybe if you think there are going to be a lot of changes in the configuration, I would rather have them in a configuration file where I don't have to recompile or change my source code and those kinds of things. But yeah, it's open to debate, and I won't comment on that at this moment of time. Can I use Hibernate if my database is Sybase? I think even I'll have to Google that. So haven't used it with Sybase yet. Not sure if it works with Sybase, but I'm sure just if you can just copy this and paste it on Google, you might get the answer. Yeah, I think the session the session context class property is something which is causing some confusion. So let me try to again touch on it and see if I can give a better explanation on what it is. I'll again take an example of a web application. What you normally do in a web application, suppose you have a screen where user is submitting data, and you need to insert that data into two tables, an order table and an order details table. Okay. Now what you would normally do is you would get a connection to the database. If you're not using Hibernate, yeah, you would get a connection to the database, and you would execute both the insert statements in a single transaction. Okay, so that if one fails, the other also fails, etc. Now, in order to do this, what you will have to do is make sure. Now, suppose you had a different class which had code to insert into the order table, and a different class which inserted code into the details table. Now, in such a scenario, you would have to make sure that your connection object gets passed to the relevant methods, or the connection object is made available in some manner to both the methods, so that both the methods can use the same connection object. Now, in order to do that, you will either have to keep passing the connection as part of the method signatures, or you have to make the connection available as a thread local variable, maybe at your HTTP request level. So this is the problem which Hibernate was trying to solve, and what it has done is given a method for you saying get current session. Now when you say get current session, and when you configure the session class as thread, Hibernate automatically makes the Hibernate session a thread local variable. So if from a context of a web application, for every request, it will ensure that there's only one session. Okay. Now, so that's the meaning. That's what happens when you say thread, and that would be ideal in case of web applications. There are other options, not only thread, but you can. There are two other. If somebody can just parallelly look it up on Google, you have the Java transaction API as the other option, and there is a third one which I don't recall right now. So in the current context, just to get started, I think we won't. Let's not waste too much time on that. But what I'm trying to do here is build up a concept, and then there's lots of experimenting to be done anyways. Hibernate in itself is a huge framework. There are lots of features which you'll have to experiment. So let's get the concepts cleared first, and then then leave it to further sessions to take care of these minute details. Fine. Right. So now what we'll do now is get into code. As I said, the first step is we need to create a session factory, and the code to create a session factory is very straightforward. It's a standard piece of code which you'll be just copying and pasting. Nothing specific to your application, nothing specific to your business functionality. So the snippet which you see on your screen right now is basically the code needed to create a session factory. So there are 3 or 4 lines of code involved here, but finally what it does is it reads all your configuration files and loads all that in memory. That's what it does. Okay, so you would create a kind of a utility class where which would create a session factory, and you have to make sure that you're caching that session factory appropriately as a at an application level, right? So I don't think it's going to be worthwhile going through these 4 or 5 lines of code, because they're very basic, and these are the lines of code which Hibernate documentation says that this is the way you have to get a session factory. So basically what it's doing is reading all your configuration files and loading them in memory. Now let's get into the actual CRUD operations. So we'll look at create first. Okay, so we had looked at one of the code snippets earlier where we were using JDBC to insert into the client table. And the save method here is the corresponding method. The save method here also inserts into the database, into the client table. And if you see, we'll go through this line by line. There's a question how transactions will work at creating the session factory object. So transactions are basically 2 levels below the session factory. Session factory will give you sessions, and on a session is equivalent to database connection. On a session you can execute multiple transactions. So that is the hierarchy, which I'll show in this particular code snippet itself. If you have a look at the save method is just a method which would insert a row into the client table. The input to the save method is a client DTO, right? Which a client class basically, which got populated from either the service layer or the presentation layer. Those 4 basic steps which I talked about, what you're doing is getting a session from the session factory. Hello. Yeah, so what you're doing is getting a session. On the session, we are beginning a transaction. And once a transaction is begun, what we're doing is we're just calling a save API. Okay. Save API, this save is the API of Hibernate, and it takes in your client class as a parameter, and that's it. So if you see, the entire part of doing an insert is being taken care by a single line called session.save, where you pass in your client class. then you commit the transaction and you're done. So what have we not done here as compared to what we would have done if we were using JDBC? We haven't written an insert statement, right, with question marks and stuff. We haven't written any code which creates a prepared statement. We have not created code which binds the values from the client DTO to the prepared statement, right? So just by writing one line of code, which is session.save, what Hibernate is internally doing, it is basically having a look at the class which you've passed. So what you've passed is the instance of a client class. What it does is looks for the fully qualified class name in all the mapping configurations which it has loaded in memory. What it finds that this is a type of class client where in our mapping file we had specified that the class client maps to the client database table. So now it knows that it needs to do an insert because you've said save. Save corresponds to insert. So Hibernate knows it needs to do an insert on the client table because you've passed in the client class. And the mapping file also tells Hibernate which attributes of the class correspond to which attributes of the columns. So just by if you look at the test insert method now, which is on top, what I've done is created an instance of the class client. I've set the age, set the name, and set the date of birth. Okay, according to this, I'm born today. Fine. And I just pass this client class or object to the save method. If you execute this piece of code, since we have turned show SQL to true, this is the insert statement which Hibernate generates and logs onto your console. So if you see, you didn't have to write any insert statements. It automatically created an insert statement by looking at your mapping files. It automatically bound the question marks with the values in your client object which you had passed it in and executed the query, right? So this is now if you look at create, even if you go to advanced levels, the create is generally straightforward. What are the main dynamics in create would be how to generate the primary key, which, as I already told you, there are different ways which you can configure Hibernate to generate primary keys. When we come to master-child relationships, it's a different ball game, so which I won't be able to cover in this particular session itself. Yeah, how the auto-generated ID will be returned by this save method is one of the questions. When you execute the save method in this client DTO object basically gets bound to the session. Okay, and using some configuration as well as APIs. Actually, I should have thought of putting this as one of the example code snippets. But okay, maybe I'll be able to share this when I share the code online. But I'll do that. So I'll share some snippet where to show you how the auto-generated ID will be made available. Obviously, there will be an additional select statement which gets fired internally by Hibernate. But yes, there are ways and means to do that. I'll be sharing this snippet for that. And sorry for not thinking of this upfront. Okay, now that we've seen how we insert into the database by using the Hibernate API, let's look at some selects. So there are basically two types of selects which we normally use. One of them being, sorry, I think I'm running out of time, but I'll just wrap it up quickly. Yeah. Select. One type of select is generally where you know the primary key. So say for you have a page which shows the search results, and you click on one of those results and you want to get details. Yeah. So we'll call that find by ID. So you know the primary key of the record and you just want to fetch it. Okay. And if you look at this snippet, this is what you have to do. Some basic steps like creating a session, beginning a transaction. Then you have to call the Hibernate API called session.get. Now what get takes in as parameters is the class, because basically the class is the way Hibernate knows which table it needs to access, because that's what you've configured in the configuration files. So session.get, and you give the name of the class and ID is the primary key. So if it's an integer primary key, you give the integer. If it's a composite primary key, you can pass it, a class also. So what you're telling Hibernate here is, give me the record from the client table whose primary key is equal to ID, and what it gives back in return is a populated instance of the client class. Okay. How to use log.debug method in Hibernate? Just the way you use log4j anywhere else. Okay. Yeah, in case of multiple IDs and where clause, how can I fetch the data? Now these are all certain, there are ways and means of writing in clauses also. I think what you're talking about is how you use an in clause where you have multiple IDs. In that case, you have to go for something called HQL, which is Hibernate's version of SQL. So there are some things where when you, without writing SQL queries, there are some things which are not possible. But yeah, that is, I won't be covering it in this session. So let's go through these snippets quickly first, and then I'll let you know what are some other things which you might need want to read on, or what topics we can cover in forthcoming sessions. If you look at this find by ID method, what have you not done? You have not written any select statement. You have not written any where clause. You have not bound the primary key to the where clause. You have not done any mapping between the result set and the POJO. All of this was done by Hibernate using just a single line of code called session.get. Right. So here now you can see definitely it's decreasing the number of lines of code. Of course, this is at a very basic level. When you get into advanced levels, you might not be able to achieve everything just by object-oriented APIs. You might have to write some sort of SQL or HQL to suit your needs, of course. But this is at a very basic level, and here is the output or the select statement which Hibernate had generated when you execute this code, and the data from the client bean was printed out. Right? So that is something which I had done on the system.out.println on the client object. The app performance I already touched on this point. How to get number of rows in a database table using Hibernate in Java. So Hibernate has APIs where once you do a get, you can actually there are APIs to get the count of the rows also. So there are APIs to execute scalar queries like count star queries. There are also methods where you can get the number of rows which have been retrieved using a simple get or a HQL. So as I said, Hibernate in itself is huge, so can't cover all the APIs in a duration of an hour. So yeah, these are just the basic concepts. Another type of select is where you want to select, like for example, a search criteria. A search criteria is where a user say I want to select all the clients who have an age of 34, or I want to select all the clients whose name is Zahir, for example. Right. So you will know what the client would type out in a search criteria, and that is where Hibernate provides an API called find by example. Okay, what you do here is you get a session, begin a transaction. Okay, let's look at the statement after the suppress warnings annotation. What you're doing here is using session.create criteria client class. So we are telling Hibernate that I need to create a criteria or a where clause on my client table. Then I say .add example.create and the instance of the client object. What I'm doing here is I'm telling Hibernate, look, I want to create a where clause on the client table, okay, and the columns in the where clause should be picked up by Hibernate from the POJO which I'm sending it. So what I did here, if you look at the test select by example, the next method, I created an instance of client and only set the age on it. And I pass that to the example.create. Okay. What it's going to do is it automatically finds out that there's only age which is populated, and it automatically generates a where clause in this manner. Right. So these are a few types of search and select statements which you can use in Hibernate. Updates. Very straightforward update. I mean, we can get into complexities where concurrency, at a very basic level, if you want to update a client, what you have to do is create a client object, set the modified parameters, set the primary key, and just call a session.update with your Pojo, and this is what will generate. Similarly for delete, just create a client object, set the primary key, and call the session.delete. It will delete that record. Very basic code snippets just to give you a gist of what Hibernate can do, what you can do without writing SQL statements. So if you want to make very quick prototypes, and just not code the JDBC statements and all those things, is a very quick way of doing it. Of course, these are very basic levels. There are huge complexities in real life applications, and we'll try to cover them in forthcoming sessions. And please do give your feedbacks also on techit.com as to what areas of Hibernate you'd like to touch upon, or how you felt the session was, whether it was relevant or was it too basic. You can give your feedbacks there, and we can have a look at that. So after looking at CRUD, so this is the last slide. I'm ending the session. This is what, once you know the concepts and you've gone through the basics now, what you would be looking for next would be, are there any tools which can auto-generate the Hibernate configuration files, the mapping files, or the a basic CRUD DAO classes? Of course, there are tools to do that. In fact, NetBeans and Eclipse, both IDEs have plugins which can be used. You just point them to your database. They auto-generate your Pojo classes looking at your database tables. They auto-generate Hibernate mapping files looking at your database tables. So the most part of your configuration gets taken care automatically. The tools also handle master-child relationships, many-to-many relationships. The Pojos are created in that manner with association relationships. So there are tools available, and tools should be used, because there's no use. You're trying to save time, and if you have to write so many configuration files, it doesn't make any sense. So there are tools here which can be used. So Hibernate tools is one of the an Eclipse plugin which you can use. NetBeans, of course, the latest version comes with Hibernate auto generation inbuilt. Then you would next we will have to have a look at what HQL is. Right now we were just dealing with the object-oriented programmatic, or just the object-oriented APIs, but there are places where you can write your own HQLs. Handling concurrency and stale data issues. Obviously, if two people are trying to update the same data, how you want to handle it, what does Hibernate provide to be able to handle such scenarios. And most important, how do you handle master-child relationships? We took examples which are very basic, single entities, no master-child, because this was a getting started session, just to give you an idea. And yeah, but this is something which we will have to get into next, I guess. So that brings us to the end of this session. Do give your feedbacks, and this was my first session on TechGig, so I don't know how I performed. So what would be topics of interest further down the line? How you found this as a getting started? Was it too basic? Was it too heavy? You can give your feedbacks, and it'll definitely help. Well, okay, thanks. Then I'll take your leave, and hope to speak to you again. And apologies for certain questions which I might not have answered because of lack of time, or because of maybe contextual mismatches, but yeah, that's going to happen, I guess.
Thanks, Mr. Zahir, for your informative session, Hibernate, getting started with CRD. It was indeed an enlightening session. I would also like to thank our participants for the support in making this webinar a huge success. The recording of this webinar will be available on techgig.com by tomorrow. Gentlemen, the next session in TechGig webinar series is happening today at 5 p.m. Topic for the webinar is Java Design Patterns, Useful Variations in Singleton Pattern. We will be having Mr. Hemant Kumar Dugar, training consultant at Login to Java as our guest speaker. So see you all at 5 p.m. Thank you.